we'll bring in some more too and put them towards the back too, all right? It's gonna be real cozy in here.
But all of you are not in the spotlight like we are. So, welcome everyone. I'll have to say for all of us, this is just amazing. This is, it's really amazing. Thank you. Welcome for coming. My dad would be thrilled. So I thought right there I'd introduce myself. I'm Monica Rudquist. I'm the other artist. But I think we're going to go down the line and introduce ourselves, and I can tell everyone how you know Jerry Rudquist.
I'm Mary Abbe, and I used to write for the Star Tribune. I retired 15 years ago, and I feel like this is a reunion. I am seeing so many faces, and I'm looking at you, and I'm seeing your art, if you're an artist, and it's way more exciting than I imagined it would be. Well, anyway. I feel I owe my career to everyone in the school. So that's part of it. I'm so grateful to see you. I'm sorry. Anyway, how do I know Jerry? Well, obviously, I wrote about his work, and he's such a fabulous colorist. I just, as you know better than me, and I just always found him interesting. His ability to take on tough issues and make them just grip you. We're sitting amid the war images. I mean, that couldn't be more topical now. And he's been dead since 2021 or no 2001. And these paintings go back decades. So it's the vitality of the images. It's the energy of them. It's the toughness. It's the hard-minded willingness to take on tough issues and bring them, out and to grab you viscerally. So, as soon as I saw them, I was deeply moved by Jerry's imagery, and it was a privilege to know him even just a little bit.
I'm Beth Bergman. I studied with Jerry Rudquist at McAllister in printmaking, design, color, painting, a couple of different interim projects. I went on to be a practicing artist and a founding member of the Groveland Gallery. At one point I bought wet paint and owned wet paint. I'm going to have it for 33 years, and I've since retired and I'm back painting.
And I'm Sally Johnson. I was the director of Groveland Gallery for 40 years. I retired about 2 years ago now. And my relationship to Jerry goes back to the first day I arrived in Minnesota. He was my first art teacher. He was my painting teacher at McAllister. And then, quite a bit later, Jerry and my first husband, the artist Craig Kelsey, developed a strong relationship. And they had weekly meetings, or bi-weekly meetings, where they would share what they were reading or what they were working on. And then, after Greg passed away, Jerry picked up those meetings with me. And so for a good 10 years, Jerry and I would meet at least once a month, and he'd have something in his pocket that he'd pull out that he wanted to talk to me about, or pull his glasses down. Very gently talk to me about something, or excitedly. And sometimes it was just Monica or Michelle, whatever you were working on, and, or it might have been something one of his students was doing, or a book he read, or a gallery he went to. And then I was lucky to know Jerry in an entirely different way when, after the Suzanne Cohn Gallery closed, Jerry came to me and asked if I would represent his work. And I was so incredibly flattered, and of course said yes, and I was terrified I might let him down. But it turned out to be a really nice relationship. So we had lots of ways of connection.
Thank you. So the first question, so we met last week and had a wonderful, very active conversation.
You should have been there. I saw people moved by Jerry's work many, many times when they came to the gallery. And I think there's something about access points maybe to the work. You can appreciate them on simply the level of a colorist. You can stand far away and see the greater structure. You can move in and see incredible painted details that you didn't even know existed. And then also, as Mary said, I think there was a thoughtfulness and an intelligence to what he chose to paint that I believe was really compelling to people and resonated deeply. We had many people came to the gallery requesting to see his work. And I think probably still do, right, Andrea? Yeah. That's my thought.
I think there's an alchemy to painting that Jerry Rudquist is kind of a quintessential master of, and that's why you're all here, and that's why half of you were at the artist talk for Stanley Whitney at the Walker last fall, and you were at my talk at Forming Content, and you were at the talk about abstract painting at CPA 3 decades ago. There's not as many opportunities to see real painting these days, and if you do that, you're out there soaking it in. So, I mean, you know, watching Mike's film, I've seen it so many times, and I squeezed out paint on a palette so many times, but you still want to just take a bite.
Yeah. I mean, over all the years, 32 years, I looked at art in this town and wrote about it and, learned about art by talking to artists and curators and traveling and so on. All of this stuff holds up. I mean, I looked at a lot of art from a lot of people in a lot of places around the world. And, the paintings that are right around you now, they're there, they're good, they're strong. And it was amazing that one guy could command that kind of talent and put it to work with a variety of topics that he took on. I'll tell you later my favorite Jerry story about topics. But, the portraits are so revealing. And I also admire so much, we've all talked about the color, but to me, that he had that amazing ability to use color as chiaroscuro, to use color to create form, not just the tonality, but to use, a hot pink streaked with yellow, streaked with orange, and then shading into green as he did in the eye, and to use that to create three-dimensionality. It's an extraordinary talent, and I think for any of you, so many of you probably are students. I don't know how many of you are students. Show of hands, students. Come on, higher. Okay. All right. Well, not everybody's a student of Jerry, but enough of you are students here to represent, represent that, and it must have been a huge privilege, to be one of his students. And I think that kind of, the combination of the sheer talent that he had, the ability to make these forms come to life, to do abstraction, to do figurative work, to do symbolic work, in so many media, and always to have that really deep human touch and the deep humanity that comes out of it. These are tough art ideas that we're surrounded by, and he had something that I didn't see. With respect, I didn't see that kind of gutsy quality in very many artists and in very much artwork. So and then we do have Monica here. I'm not going to just talk. I got to shut up. But I just want you to look at these amazing pieces that, we'll talk about it later, I think, but what blew me away was when I was asking about them. It turns out that each one of these has a little egg behind it that holds this piece onto the wall. And you think about how many little eggs there are on this wall holding these little bits of porcelain, and the craquelure in it, amazing. Anyway, there are so many reasons to respect Jerry and his legacy, and he's here.
Well, speaking of his legacy, as his daughter, as his oldest daughter, his other daughter is over there, back there. We have a somewhat limited perspective on him because he's their dad, right? As an artist, for me, right? This show came together because I had really never thought about my dad's work before as an artist. Because my dad was always at artist, right? And of course, we were surrounded by his work because we lived doing it, but I never had a chance to really look at it, right? And so my response to looking closely is sort of the result of this show. So another gallery compared pieces that are paired up, where I discovered those commonalities, but I didn't make those pieces imagine to each other. I thought this piece, as Mary said, is a reaction to this work here, right, and the art that we're here. But still, my perspective is of my father, right? And so there was that sort of encouragement, even though I've seen his work, me. Well, what is your perspective on my dad's career as an educator and artist? And, yeah, your perspective on his legacy.
I think as a student of his, he embraced a very liberal arts attitude about how to teach art, and that there was a very different kind of audience for his class with a liberal arts college like McAllister, and it was very nurturing in a time when a lot of art schools were doing their best to put you in tears and get you to run out the door and never come back again. And he and I had talks about this, that it was consciously done by the art department at McAllister to embrace a more nurturing situation. And I think there's some very good artists that are still practicing in town here or have gone other places that are the results of that it was not a coddled situation. And it was part of my perspective has always been on liberal arts education, so not so much that you're taking a class in all those different fields, but you knew students that were taking those classes in those other fields. And then sometimes they ended up in your painting class. So you had that crossover that you didn't necessarily get at dedicated art school.
Beth, talking about the supportive nature, and it was not that it was undisciplined. Jerry was a very disciplined teacher, and he set an example of discipline. We all who went to school here remember walking across the campus late at night. You could always see Jerry in his studio. The lights were on. You knew he was working, and he worked. His work was often alongside ours, so he was working on things, and we'd come and go from class. I like to tell, and for years I've told a story that was hugely important to me, but at my very first painting critique, and you're 17 or 18 years old, and you made your dumb little picture or whatever, and you gotta put it up on the wall, and you gotta brace for this moment where there's gonna be a critique, first one ever. And I remember exactly what Jerry said to me. He said, Sally, the upper left-hand corner of this reminds me of the way Rembrandt brought light into us. And then, but it was a wonderful way to encourage someone to paint and to take constructive criticism. It was really invaluable to me. And he was a real advocate for every student that ever came through his department. You might have seen in that picture, maybe you didn't notice, but there was a photo in the film of Jerry in his office. And he had a desk that was piled at least 24 inches high with papers, and the walls were covered with postcards from former students and letters from this and postcards of shows. And I used to joke with them that we should do core samples and like see, just drill down and see what was at the bottom of this. So, but he had all of that. He'd say, "Oh yeah, you know, there was somebody here once who did," and he'd start rooting around in there, and he'd pull out a postcard from 10 years earlier from somebody's show. It was like, wow. So anyway, he was a real advocate for every student that we had. So,
But the level of craftsmanship was very, very important. I mean, we learned how to build our own stretchers and stretch our own canvas and prepare the canvas with rabbit's glue or white lead. And Sally and I talked about this because this particular lesson was still going on when she was there a couple of years after I was. That he decided it was what he called the ball wall. And each of us had to make a 1 foot square canvas. We had to do 3 of them. And we had to draw a circle and then paint one with cool shadows like, I can't remember what Greek master had cool shadows. Raphael. And then, thank you. And then I think it was Rubens that had the warm shadows, and then one that was done with just neutral grays. And so we all worked on these things, and he had this vision. It was going to be this huge wall with all these things. He said, well, it was very interesting how all these art students had a different idea about what 1 foot square was.
You know, your comment about craft is very interesting. I went through this show, a few days ago, and over there, there are some comments from Jerry, just at the left, just before the door, that were taken out of apparently one of his journals from 1974. And I was very, one of them really caught my eye. What he wrote, apparently on the 16th of March in 1974, in his journal or his sketchbook, he wrote, "The important thing boils down to simply determination." That one difference accounts for the most part for the difference of accomplishment between people. From determination flows time, energy, ideas, and craft. And that really hit me, the idea that, that and something else that Monica said. You spent a lot of time apparently in his studio under, a table there, looking out a window, because.
And I was very little.
Yeah. Because he was doing daycare, right? While working, while teaching at McAllister. He was also the daycare dad. And because your mom was an architect? Yeah. Okay. I never met your mom. But I thought, okay, so here's this guy who's taking care of 2 little kids, teaching at McAllister, nurturing his students, and also trying to have a career, trying to build his own reputation, create these works we see around you, watch the dates. And so from determination flows time. He had to find the time. He was determined to find the time to also have a family, to also take care of his students and his own career. But, so he finds time because he's determined. And then he's gotta have the energy, that's the second thing. So he's gotta have the energy to do this. And he's determined to have the time and the energy. And from that, he says, flows ideas. So he's gotta have, you gotta get the ideas going. And then craft. And that's a very, very important collection of things that you have to pull out of your own soul and out of your own spirit in order to have a successful career as an artist. And apparently he gave that gift to a lot of students in this room who went on to have careers, and a lot of artists who may not have been as students, who may have come upon these ideas on their own. But I was really touched when I saw that down there. It's on one of those two Xeroxes down there at the end. So, anyway, an inspiration to a lot of us. Determination.
I'll tell one other thing, because this is, I suspect everyone's had moments in their life where, you know, there's a glow that just comes, it's the big light bulb, really big light bulb. And, I believe it was in color and design class. Jerry went to the library and got the Joseph Albers Interaction Color book, which they wouldn't let anybody take that book out of the library. They had to be Jerry Rudquist. And, so we all sat down in a room, and he went through this book of silk screened images of how color reacts to one another. And all of a sudden you could see that Mr. Rudquist was no longer in the room with us. He had gone to that land of color. And it was observing that said, yeah, this is what I gotta do.
So that makes me think about, you were saying earlier, that your class was a fairly, important class, let's just say.
Exceptional.
Exceptional, class. There were at least
12.
12 art majors who then continued to go on to be full careers in teaching or
Actually, we just had a 50th reunion exhibit two years ago. And all but one of those people was no longer practicing art. One other person was no longer making his own art, but actually manufactures and constructs art for blue chip artists in New York, Milan, Berlin or something. So it's, everyone else had current work or related careers. So it was a group. And I mean, it was Kent State, Vietnam War, and everything else, so we had our own little hideout in the art department.
So that sort of leads us to
I think one of the unique things about Jerry was that there was no, there was a great humility and an eagerness to engage in a lot of places. So at the same time, he might be doing a large commission painting for a new building in downtown Minneapolis. He was painting paintings of pigs for the state fair. I mean, he had a very open mind about what to make art of and who should see it, and it should be available everywhere to everybody. And I think that was a huge part of his importance, was that he made himself accessible in so many ways. So, yeah. And he really did, like, I don't know if you have them, but he had these sketchbooks, you have a lot of them, I think, with projects, and he was always working on projects, and whether or not they were commissioned for somebody, there were a great many commissioned paintings, which was quite unusual to be, I mean, they were in corporate collections all over the state.
I said, talk more about that. I mean, I didn't know that about
Federal
Jerry.
Reserve, Piper Jaffray, I mean, they were 3M, these were Prudential. Yeah, he was getting these big commissions,
What were they commissioning him to do?
great big, beautiful paintings.
Just, I mean, he could choose his own content.
You know, I'm sure he worked with some committee that probably, with some institute, some something, but.
But he's mostly known, I mean, when I think of Jerry Rudquist's work, I think of, portraits, I think of portrait heads, I think of the, war flowers, I think of, the must we always have war behind it, on the wall behind you. So I think of issues and portraits. I don't think, for example, of landscapes. And so much corporate stuff back in the day.
Oh,
used to
these
be,
were, these were big abstract paintings.
Okay, so.
And imagine, well, there's one painting in that other room, but these would have been, take that twice and turn it on its side. Yeah, they were huge color abstract paintings. So.
You would make models of them. I remember when you needed to come up with different iterations and present them. But his presentations, it wasn't just like paintings. He would literally build
Little three-dimensional.
three-dimensional model, and then they'd have a figure, you might even have a furniture, have the walls, very well drawn.
Without a computer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, these scale models of lobbies with his paintings in them and people standing in the room and.
And so then he would have the different images, so that you could switch them out. Like, okay, you don't like that one? Well, how about this one? Yeah, those themselves were little paintings. They weren't sketches. These were almost like full,
Yeah.
So it's like dollhouses.
kind of.
Kind
yes.
of.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yes,
Still have
We have some, yeah.
Cool.
It is, yeah.
that was, but he also at the same, he would put the same sort of intensity into the big paintings he made, but I mean, in that other room, there are these little paintings that have more in them than any huge painting you've ever seen. I mean, they're extraordinary. But he could give so much to something this big and so much to something that big is, I think, remarkable. Yeah.
Oh, they want the state fair story. Okay, so, my favorite Jerry Rudquist story, was that, it has to do with the fact that he was always engaged in the community in one way or another. And I always loved covering the State Fair Art Show. That was not popular necessarily with everybody, but I adored doing it because I saw it as the best pro-am exhibition in the state. You'd get you know, people like Stuart Clipper, who has photos in the, at the time, had photos in the Museum of Modern Art, and you'd get Jerry Rudquist, who was teaching here and had a huge camp following of students and so on. And you would get, you know, somebody you'd never heard of before, who was a really fabulous artist, coming from who knows where. And so I always like to go there and see this mix of talents and people, and, you know, and whatever the themes were. Some, you know, I remember one year where it seemed that a lot of the photographers had done a lot of traveling. And so it was very, very well curated that year. Sorry, I can't remember the name of the curator, because it was a photographer who was doing the curating, and it was really good. And one year the sculpture was, which normally wasn't a strong suit, was very good. And it turned out that it was Olga Wiesel at the Walker, who was fairly new at the time, and she had been invited to do the sculpture curating. And it was like, wow, you know, this is the first time I had seen some of this stuff. It was terrific. So back to painting, many of you are painters. And Jerry, of course, would like all of the, you know, really talented painters in town enter in the state fair. He didn't always get in, apparently. I mean, that's true for all of the artists, and I would hear later, well, I didn't get into the state fair art show this year. How did that happen? So this year, he entered a painting about this big. I mean, I think it was about that big, yeah. It was called Petunia, and it was a close-up of a Chester White hog from the front, like this, and she was leaning forward like this, and she, you know, had a big snout like this, and she was absolutely adorable. He had painted her in his best Rubens-esque style, and you know Rubens, you know, that flesh that's three-dimensional and it's sort of glowing, and there was Petunia leaning forward like this, kind of winking at the crowd. Well, needless to say, she became the people's choice. So she was up front, so when you came into the State Fair art show, well, let's imagine this. Okay, you come in and you got all your galleries like this, and you're walking into the door here. She was just to the right, to your right, and, you know, glowing at everybody. So Petunia was a huge hit. We did a, you know, big picture of her in the newspaper, and everybody loved Petunia. So, and I, of course, you know, featured her in my review of the State Fair art show. One of the things I like to do when I did the State Fair art show, I made a point of, whenever possible, getting the names of the towns that the artist came from, because I felt it was very, very important to have not just the artist name, but the town, because it mattered, especially when they were from outstate. What the newspaper at the time condescendingly referred to as outstate. And as a farm gal from Elberly, Minnesota, I got a little irritated about being condescended to as from outstate, but never mind. So at any rate, there was Petunia. So Petunia had her moment. A few weeks later, I'm sitting in the newsroom, and, you know, I must have gone off to pick up my mail or something. At any rate, there was a little box there, or an, I don't know, it was a mailing envelope, or what, it was a box about this big. And I opened it up, and in it was a painting that was given, or an image that came from Jerry Rudquist to me as a thank you. Well, one of the things I never did as a reporter at the Star Tribune was buy art, because I didn't want to get into that, you know, oh, she's promoting somebody whose art she owns. Never bought art for the 32 years I worked there. And I never accepted a gift from artists. I mean, and artists they're generous, they're nice, they're happy when somebody's paid attention to them and someone would like to send you something, and thanks, you know. So here was this wonderful little thing. Well, there's this wonderful little thing there, and it was called After the Fair. And this goes back to what Jerry knew about the community. So After the Fair consisted of a picture of a pork chop held by a string and dangling from the top of the little frame. And the reason that's important at the State Fair particularly is that if you were a 4-H kid who had brought your which you would spend a year raising, and furthermore, training. You'd have a cane, and you would have to take your petunia out and walk it up and down the road, up and down the driveway, and train your petunia to walk so that petunia could go into the show ring, and be judged on, the shape of its haunches, or its walk, or something. It had to have the right body for the kind of animal. But after the fair, if you were in 4-H, because you were raising your animal for slaughter, you had to sell it. And it had to go to market. And if you didn't do that, your grand champion ribbon or whatever would be taken away. And the girl who lived across the field from me, Kathy, had raised a sheep one year, and she made the mistake of naming her sheep lambkins. And come time to take lambkins to the fair, she couldn't do it. So at any rate, because she knew it would have to go to market. So there I am with this after the fair painting of a pork chop. And it was totally Rembrandt-esque. I mean, it was Rembrandt, and and artists love to go to the abattoirs in Paris and to draw the flesh, because where else are you going to see raw flesh but in the slaughterhouses? And so, Taine and Rembrandt, all these artists have done paintings of raw meat, right? And I love this, of course, because it's after the fair, and this is what happens. But I thought, I can't do this. So I called Jerry, and I said, Jerry, I really love after the fair. I mean, it couldn't be a better thing. Thank you so much, but I'm going to mail it back to you because I can't accept a gift from an artist. And he said, Mary, it's a Xerox. So, needless to say, I still have, after the fair, every year in August, I get it out and I hang it up next to the door.
Now you've all heard a little more about my father's sense of humor. But I think now might be a good time to open it up for other stories. Do we have more? Is there
Oh, go ahead, Ken.
Yes.
I just wanted to, I'm Tom Knoxstead, I remember that painting of Petunia. He did 2 more in the state fair annually, and he reduced Petunia down to a head hanging from a hook. And it was a la,
Oh, I missed that one.
I wrote about it.
Didn't I? Maybe it's memory loss,
Well, there was a big cow too, right? Wasn't there
Yes,
a big cow
yeah.
painting? Yeah.
He was actually working on a big cow. It's in my daughter-in-law's son's house. And it's not quite done,
Not quite finished, yeah.
but it's, yeah. That was the next, fair feature.
So great.
Others?
I'll be brave.
Yeah.
All right, so, I worked for Sally back in the 90s and early 2000s. And, I got to know Jerry there. And,
Sullender and Ruth Ann Goodolly and Mary Hart and Victoria Christian and the woman who worked in the office. It was very much a team, and everybody was listened to in our faculty meetings weekly or however, was really fun. And he was just a really incredible mensch and also a wonderful artist to watch. And I learned a lot from him. And before I started, like a couple days or the week before I was going to start to go to the first faculty meeting, he took me to the St. Clair Boy where we had lunch. So anyway, I worked with him those 2 times, and it was always a joy to see him, hearing him in the movie today. He was an incredible sparkle, and he and everybody in the department created the most amazing atmosphere. So, I mean, I taught in other art departments, at the McAllister Art Department at that time. I don't know how it is now, but it was incredibly special. So tragic. I'm just retired, but meeting death was very sad. But he was a wonderful person to work under and be a colleague.
Andrew talks about through lines, and you never know exactly where it's going and where it comes out, but I credit Jerry in a funny way with my not being an artist and being an art dealer instead, because one of the very first pieces of art I ever bought was one of Jerry's paintings. Suzanne Cohn let us pay for it over, I think, 2.5 years. Like $70 a month or $60 a month or something. And the thrill I got from buying a piece of art was greater than the thrill I got from making it. So I really think that's kind of what encouraged me to do what I did.
So I was a student of Jerry's and I actually chose McAllister partially because Jerry was the instructor there. And at a young age, I was doing abstract work. When I was young, 6th grade, I was doing abstract work, so I have propensity for that. Besides, my parents had a legacy from McAllister, taught my mother taught me. Anyway, so I was just thrilled to be working with an abstract artist. So that's what I wanted to do this whole time. And took classes. Some of the exercises that he gave us, I absolutely detested. The one where he would say, okay, you need to take a piece of paper and curl it in a way, and then you need to paint that just like it is. And I could not keep color out of it. I mean, mine was a white piece of paper, but it ended up red and purple. And it's just like, okay, Jan, yeah, just skip you. I know you love color, but but he was just such a wonderful mentor